and Society by Norbert Wiener. I'm going to read a fragment on page 131 with the title Role of the Intellectual and the Scientist. This book argues that the integrity of the channels of internal communication is essential to the welfare of society. This internal communication is subject at the present time not only for the threats which it has faced at all times, but to certain new and especially serious problems which belong peculiarly to our age. One amongst these is the growing complexity and cost of communication. 150 years ago, or even 50 years ago, it does not matter which, the world and America in particular were full of small journals and presses through which almost any man could obtain a hearing. The country editor was not, as he is now, limited to boilerplate and local gossip, but could and often did express his individual opinion, not only of local affairs, but of world matters. At present, this license to express oneself has become so expensive with the increased cost of presses, paper, and syndicated services that the newspaper business has come to be the art of saying less and less to more and more. The movies may be quite inexpensive as far as concerns the cost of showing each show to each spectator, but they are so horribly expensive in the mass that few shows are worth the risk, unless their success is certain in advance. It is not the question whether a show may excite a great interest in a considerable number of people that interests the entrepreneur, but rather the question of whether it will be unacceptable to so few that he can count on selling it indiscriminately to movie theaters from coast to coast. What I have said about the newspaper and the movies also, what I've said about the newspapers and the movies applies equally to radio, to television, and even to bookselling. Thus, we are in an age where the enormous per capita bulk of communication is met by an ever-thinning stream of total bulk of communication. More and more we must accept a standardized, inoffensive, and insignificant product which, like the white bread of the bakeries, is made rather for its keeping and selling properties than for its food value. This is fundamentally an external handicap of modern communication, but it is paralleled by us from within. This is the cancer of creative narrowness and feebleness. In the old days, the young man who wished to enter the creative arts might either have plunged in directly or prepared himself by a general schooling, perhaps irrelevant to the specific task he finally undertook, but which was at least a searching discipline of his abilities and taste. Now the channels of apprenticeship are largely slitted up. Our elementary and secondary schools are more interested in formal classroom discipline than in intellectual discipline of learning something thoroughly. And a great deal of the serious preparation for a scientific or literary course is relegated to some sort of graduate school or other. Hollywood, meanwhile, has found that the very standardization of its product has interfered with the natural flow of acting talent from the legitimate stage. The repertoire of theaters had almost ceased to exist when some of them were reopened as Hollywood talent farms, and even these are dying on the vine. To a considerable extent, our young would-be actors have learned their trade not on the stage, but in university courses on acting. Our writers can get very fast as young men in competition with syndicate material. And if they do not make a success the first try, they have no place to go but college courses which are supposed to teach them how to write. Thus, the higher degrees and above all the PhD, which have had a long existence as the legitimate preparation of the scientific specialist, are more and more serving as a model for intellectual training in all fields. Properly speaking, the artist, the writer, and the scientist should not. Properly speaking, the artist, the writer, and the scientist should be moved by such an irresistible impulse to create that, even if they were not being paid for their work, they would be willing to pay to get to the chance to do it. However, we are in a period in which forms have largely superseded educational content, and one which is moving toward an ever-increasing thinness of educational content. It is now considered perhaps more a matter of social prestige to obtain a higher degree and follow what may be regarded as a cultural career than a matter of any deep impulse. In view of this great bulk of semi-mature apprentices who are being put on the market, the problem of giving them colorable material to work on has assumed an overwhelming importance. Theoretically, they should find their own material, but the big business of modern advanced education cannot be operated under this relatively low pressure. Thus, the earlier stages of creative work, whether in the arts or in the sciences, which should properly be governed by a desire on the part of the student to create something and to communicate it to the world at large, are now subject, instead of the formal requirements of finding PhD, theses or similar apprentice Scholars have even asserted that a PhD thesis should be the greatest scientific work a man has ever done and perhaps will ever do, and should wait until he is truly able to state his life work. I do not go along with this. I mean merely that if the thesis is not in fact such an overwhelming task, it should at least be an intention, the gateway to vigorous creative work. Lord only knows that there are enough problems yet to be solved, books to be written, and music to be composed. Yet, for all but a very few, the path to these lies through the performance of perfunctory tasks in which, in 9 cases out of 10, have no compelling reason to be performed. Heaven save us from the first novels which are written because a young man desires the prestige of being a novelist rather than because he has something to say. Heaven save us likewise from the mathematical papers which are correct and elegant but without body or spirit. Heaven save us above all from the snobbery which not only admits the possibility of this thin and perfunctory work, but which cries out in spirit of shrinking arrogance against the competition of vigor and ideas, wherever these may be found. In other words, when there is communication without need for communication, merely so that someone may earn the social and the intellectual prestige of becoming a priest of communication, the quality and communicative value of message drop like a plummet. It is if a machine should be made from Rube Goldberg point of view to show just what recondite and may be served by an apparatus apparently quite unsuitable for them, rather than do something in the arts. The desire to find new things to say and new ways of saying them is the source of all life and interest. Yet every day we meet with examples of painting where, for instance, the artist has bound himself from the new canons of the abstract and has displayed no intention to use these canons to display an interesting and novel form of beauty, to pursue the uphill fight against the prevailing tendency towards the commonplace and the banal. Not all artistic pedants are academicians. There are pedantic avant-gardists. No school has a monopoly on beauty. Beauty, like order, occurs in many places in this world, but only as a local and temporary fight against the Niagara of increasing entropy. I speak here with a feeling which is more intense as far as concerns the scientific artist and the conventional artist, because it is in science that I have first chosen to say something. What sometimes enrages me and always disappoints and grieves me is the preference of great schools of learning for next time.